Great. I can't see my. There we go. Now can you see? Okay. You still have it?
Yep.
Yep, we see it. We got your
Okay, great.
neurofeedback for operant
Excellent.
performance. Perfect.
Oh, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share a few of the experiences that I've learned over the past few years. And um, really it's always a pleasure to kind of share knowledge and communicate and also learn from the questions that hopefully you'll ask at the end. So I'll be mindful of time. I don't want to feel rushed, but at the same time, I also know that this is a set time during your lunchtime, so I'll leave some time at the end for questions and hopefully be able to address them there. But I wanted to talk to you a bit today about neurofeedback. I call it for optimal performance and sport because I think by simply stating sport or just performance or just optimal performance, we kind of limit ourselves. And I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, most likely, that people ask me from time to time, who is neurofeedback good for? And I, tongue in cheek, but quite seriously mean anybody who has a brain. And I think we would all subscribe to that. But my focus over the past 6-7 years has been training elite athletes' brains. I got very lucky to be standing in the right place at the right time, had some really incredible opportunities that allowed me to evolve as a professional, but also allowed me the chance to learn from and work with some of the best performers in the world. So overall, in that process, we're really trying to help athletes manage impulse control, help them intensify their focus, control their stress, improve recovery, but ultimately, as we know, we were teaching them to get in the right brain state at the right time. So all of these things are valuable, and being in any one particular place at a time for an extended period of time is where we start to see people showing up in our offices with clinical presentations. So our mission really has been to help individuals' brains perform better. But perform means lots of things. So we're going to talk a bit about what that means specifically with athlete populations, but this carries over into business executives or healthier populations, whatever that might mean for you and those around you. So I wanted to introduce, I like to let athletes speak for themselves, and if you've seen one of these videos before, I apologize in advance, but it's always fun to hear again. But I'd like to give you just a little taste of the culture by allowing the athlete to speak.
We spend so much time working on our bodies and working on our craft and trying to perfect it and trying to be more powerful. But sports is so mental, and it's like, how are we training ourselves to be better mentally? And, there's just not really a lot out there. As an athlete, there's always the zone that everyone always talks about. And in a basketball season, we play 82 games, and you may only find the zone 3, 4, 5 times in that 82-game stretch. And so when you're in the zone, things are happening slower. You're able to see things before they happen. The basket looks so big. That's when you're playing at your very best. So it's like, how do you try to create that zone more often than you would just by finding rhythm in your shot or something? My profile came back and it said that I was able to engage at a high level for a long period of time, but I wasn't able, like on a scale of 1 to 10, I could hang out at an 8 or 9 for a long time, but it was hard for me to hit that 10 because while I was at an 8 or 9, I would never drop down to like a 2 or a 3. I was not able to fully relax. I was always engaged on some level, and so it was a big eye-opener for me, and it's showing that, like if I do want to get to that 10, if I do want to find those zones, those kind of sweet spots, I have to learn how to, pull back all the way and just do it.
Yeah, with tennis, I know all the top players are mentally strong. That's what separates a great player from a good player. You can be a great athlete, you can hit the ball great, but if you can't focus, you can't stay relaxed when you focus, and you can't draw on that focus when you need it during the big matches, you know, you can hit the ball perfect, but you know, you're not going to go anywhere. I'm kind of a, you know, high-strung type A personality. You know, I'm always thinking about the next match. You know, I'm more worried than my twin brother, who's identical twins. That, you know, he doesn't think about it as much. I don't sleep well before big matches. This definitely helped me, you know, relax, helped me actually sleep better before big matches, which is huge. So you know, you recover, you can focus. You know, and not only on a tennis court, you know, it doesn't just fit the sport, but I noticed during the day I was in a better frame of mind, a little bit more positive. I'm not reacting to, you know, things that go wrong on the freeway or you know, with my wife. So I mean, it also translates to life.
I think this is what's next. This is what's gonna. I mean, if you can get good at this, this just gives you an advantage over everybody else.
All right. So there's a couple of things that threads that always tend to emerge when speaking with athletes and talking about either sports psychology applications or neurofeedback specifically, and that it revolves around a couple of specific themes, and we'll touch on those in just a couple of minutes. But I include this slide just really to get it in so that you can read it at a later time, not knowing exactly who ends up on the call. There's a few things that we all typically agree on within the psychophysiology and EEG world. And these are those premises that have already been established, and largely it revolves around what is my elevator pitch when athletes say, you know, what is it that you do? I basically explain that their brain makes electricity, and those different electrical signatures vary depending on what they're doing. So sleep looks different from focus, looks different from stress, and that also has implications into clinical pathologies. And learning how to shift those signatures into a more efficient state is what will help them create that opportunity for increased performance. So I often use a weightlifting analogy or a gym analogy because that resonates. People are already familiar with it, where a coach might teach a particular skill. That's still true from a mental aspect. A sports psychologist or someone who's teaching mental skills will help evolve a skill development, where neurofeedback is the opportunity to do what the strength and conditioning coach or being in the weight room does. It allows the brain to be efficient and strong in being able to perform that skill. So there's three basic ways that we've started to address this. And by we, I mean both myself, but the scientific community, you guys, the neurofeedback community. And when I first came in 6 years ago to this specific population, it was really around there were a couple of three areas where people really beat us up. The first was the science. You know, where's the evidence that this will make me run faster, kick harder, throw farther, those types of things. The technology is a bit antiquated with regard to it's not very sexy or appealing, because when we say you play video games with your brain, they have something different in mind than what we typically show them when they actually show up in the office. And then there's this issue around the culture, and that's one of the things I think I've seen the most progress in what we've been working on. And again, that collective we is that it's not just the thing that you do if something's wrong with you. It's not that brain training or neurofeedback or developing mental skills are just what you do when something's wrong, but it can be kind of preventative or optimizing. So we've done that in a couple of ways. I'll just kind of give you a very, very brief intro to it, but basically looking for better ways to engage them, looking at better experiences, meaning both, delivering neurofeedback in interesting ways, meaning like mobile platforms, mobile devices, also putting it into the field. I don't have time to show you lots of the practical examples of doing this, but having devices in the basketball court so that we can measure people while they're doing free throws. So putting it into something that's more tangible, so it's more generalizable to their real life experience. We've created a broader appeal, a broader audience, rather than just focusing on clinical presentations. And in fact, when I have the opportunity to work with somebody who's on that clinical spectrum, I still talk to them about in terminology around optimal performance, because really we all have strengths and weaknesses, and it's the severity of that strength or weakness which determines whether we're an elite performer or whether we have a clinical diagnosis. So a diagnostic threshold is just a threshold which we set around a weakness that even a healthy individual may have. started demonstrating efficacy in performance outcomes. So we've done a couple of studies ourselves. I know some other groups around in Europe and in Australia are doing performance outcomes, looking to see not just how does this change the EEG or cognitive ability, but how does this change your capacity in a game? So wins versus losses, hits versus misses, etc. And so that's emerging, and there's quite a few, and by quite a few I mean a dozen or less of those studies out now, but they are coming through. And then we tell the story through athlete personas. So all of a sudden, the 15-year-old who is in my office who didn't want to do neurofeedback because of his attention deficits or his learning challenges in school now sees a famous athlete who's talking about it, and now they're very interested in engaging because it changes the dynamic. So those are all things that have shifted. And then we've kind of figured a few things out around, so I've collected data from 1,200 or greater elite performers, and that's predominantly athletes, professional athletes, Olympic athletes, but also some Fortune 50 executives and a few performing artists, either in drama or television, those types of things. But what's interesting about that is all of those individuals who are elite performers have some similar characteristics, and I'll share that with you. But if we think specifically just about athlete populations, there is a uniqueness about it, and that was probably the largest eye-opener for me coming into it. I knew a lot about neurofeedback and QEEG, but it's a whole different culture, and so I want to share that with you to kind of accelerate that process for you, because then recently I've taken on full-time academic position where some of my time is spent lecturing in psychology, but the rest of the time, strangely enough, is hanging out with athletes in a very athlete-centric university. So we have to get an awareness of that culture. And in order to do that, the best thing I can tell you to do, and people are always asking me, well, how do you get these clients? Do you walk up to the local professional team and knock on the door? And the answer is a resounding and loud, emphatic no. If you walk up to the door and knock, you're likely to not get in at any point. So you kind of have to be a bit more organic about moving into the organization. It's a very closed off kind of situation. So unless you have some strong ties to the local sports community, it's really about getting out there and being part of it, being present, being seen. So that means working with local coaches and local trainers and getting involved. And by being around, you're both gaining an appreciation of their specific pressures, the goal differences, but you're also demonstrating that you have this awareness, and that's where the rapport and the buy-in comes. So unlike in a mental health setting where you have those first few sessions of interview and getting to know each other and explaining your services, that opportunity doesn't present itself in this population very much unless it is more clinical in nature. So this is like the literal implementation of meeting the client where they are, and that means at the field, in their place of work. Understanding that appreciation of differences of goals, but also is important and relevant to our overall awareness, and that's pretty easy for us as trained mental health providers of some sort. But then we also have to understand the sport and performance specifics, and we can't possibly know all of these things. We all may have a niche sport that we either played when we were younger or potentially still do. But there is this organic authenticity that has to happen where we understand the sport. And I always start off by saying, you're an expert in you and you're the expert in your sport. I'm the expert in this piece of it, and together we can teach each other a few things. So it opens the door that I have an awareness, but also sets the stage that we're not coming in as a know-it-all, like, oh yeah, I played high school basketball. Well, that was a long time ago, and it doesn't equate me to what these athletes are either experiencing or have gone through. So it allows that opportunity for uniqueness. And then we additionally need to kind of understand, how does the brain contribute to optimal performance, and how does that differ from what we're typically accustomed to with regard to clinical situations. So the idea of normalizing a brain, the idea of remediation of a symptom takes on an entirely different situation. I apologize, the phone's ringing there. Let me take care of that. Okay, so it takes on a whole different situation, and specifically by the capacity for us to recognize and teach the application of trait characteristics, which is more along the lines of our clinical scenarios, compared to our state application, which is more around performance. So we're interested in our state rather than our trait. Now, if we're doing a crossover kind of a thing, and I encourage you to kind of split the boundaries. So if you're a licensed provider of mental health care services and you have a client who is an athlete and you're working on their anxiety or their mood regulation, those types of things, that is a very different scenario than working with a client who is an athlete who is specifically interested in dealing with a situation. It may look and sound and even use similar vocabulary as the clinical situation, but they're very different things. And if they have both, I encourage you to partner up with somebody. Allow your colleague to focus on the clinical component and you focus on the performance component, or vice versa, whatever works best for your model. But that's a really important distinction, that when you start muddying these things together, and they're certainly related and you can talk about how they're related, but it's not unlike our ethical dual relationships, where if we have a person who is a student and a client, we have two roles. Well, this is a similar scenario. It's hard for us to deal with in performance. It's a very different goal than it is to deal with the person just having a happier life because they've got a mood regulation problem. So I want to make sure and point that out. And then if that's unclear at the end, let me know and I'll come back to it. But really the performance may have a very different goal than the real life application. So yeah, so I'll leave that there. So I want to define optimal performance a bit, which is different from peak performance and is different from peak experience. But optimal performance is kind of the area where most of us live and work. So a peak experience, by quick definition, is that moment where it's blissful for the individual. Everything just went fantastic. It has no bearing on the outcome. They just felt good. It was great. I really enjoyed the experience of it, and that was a peak experience. A peak performance is when I did better than I've ever done, and maybe I set a personal record or a personal best. It was the best I've ever done. That's a peak experience. But an optimal performance really should be our goal, because that allows us to emphasize bringing all of the pieces together at the highest level that we can based on the environment, both internal and external, at that given moment. So we want to make sure and understand that all of the performance factors have been achieved. So in bold there, I have the official definition that we're kind of going to go with, which is by Kim and Jackson, which is the idea that we're achieving optimal levels and doing that on a more consistent basis. And that's what really the brain training or the neurofeedback application allows us to do, is to tap into whatever particular state is necessary for this particular moment. And it's a slight practical example, or a quick practical example. There's a young skier that I've had the chance to talk to on many occasions, and sometimes he might be overamped, sometimes he might be a little flat, and so it's not just when I'm going to the starting gates or he's going to the starting gates that it's the same experience every time. It depends on who's lining up beside them, which heat they're in, which event it is. And so it's about that ability to bring all of the performance factors together for this particular moment that we're in. And again, of course, this translates over to executives. If we're in a board meeting versus a sales strategy meeting versus dealing with an employee situation, and moms and dads and all sorts of varying jobs, even us, bringing to this particular session with this particular client what I need in order to help them facilitate growth compared to another client that just left. So getting a little brass tacks, the EEG is really a valuable tool in allowing us to start a conversation. Was an athlete who was really opposed to doing mental skills types of things, or being, seeing the shrink, so to speak. It was a very negative stigma around sports psychology or mental skills training, those types of things. But the athlete had some opportunities for improvement specifically around that. Physically was really a phenomenal performer. And it was leading up to World Championships and an Olympic situation, and we did an evaluation and provided the results. And it wasn't that we were going to do intervention. We didn't approach this from a psychology type of perspective. It was very objective. And that's one of the values I think that we all find in EEG work, but can be specifically valuable to this population, is because it's a number. what did my brain do, and then how can I improve it is the natural question that always follows. So you don't even have to introduce the intervention. You just simply say, let's learn about how your brain works, and then we can facilitate better communication. We can facilitate understanding how it contributes to your performance. But inevitably, 9 out of 10 times they say, that's awesome. Can I change that number? Can I make that better? Can I reduce that particular finding or increase another finding? So when we start talking about those things, it opens up a conversation. It also allows us to monitor progress. And so we can see, how do other types of interventions impact our performance? So there's this ongoing opportunity around education. So I want to break down for you basically a model, a performance model for carrying out brain training. Brain training here means a large number of things, or not larger, it means 3 specific things, but it's inclusive of all of them. So there are 3 domains which I typically refer to as domains, and it's the mind domain, and that's the one, the way we feel, that's the emotional component, our attitude that we bring to the situation, all of the typical psychology types of things that we might attribute that label to it. There's the way that we think, which is the cognitive domain, and this is really the way that our brain processes information, our strategy, our planning, our organization, all of those. If we start thinking about structures of the brain, the functionality, the ability, those skills, specific skills. And then there's the neurodomain, or the way that our brain functions. And each of those components have both assessments, they have training, and they have monitoring. And I won't spend much time at all on the first 2, which are training the mind, but these are things that we would typically do in a performance setting, but you might also do in clinical scenarios where you have goal setting. You might do some visualization. It's around team building and explaining self-efficacy and working through how do we attain self-efficacy, and in some specific applications like mental imagery and focusing on the process and not the outcome, those types of reframing, positive self-talk, all those types of things about the way, the emotionality of the situation and how that comes to the performance. And we may do some specific skills like attention building skills. We might do some memory games, perceptual skills. These are things that gain a lot of traction in this community because there's some technology around it. There's several different companies that make various things where you can try and measure reaction speed and increase reaction speed by playing cognitive types of games and strategy games and memory things. Those are all good, but it's also about, you know, X's and O's on the whiteboard and memorizing plays and those types of things. So it is very much can be sport integrated, or whatever the individual's application is, but they're really around just being able to more efficiently cognitively process things and integrate them. And then lastly, the area that we're kind of focused on today, which is the neural component, or the neuro component. And these are some labels that I created to talk to athletes in a different way. So without getting into the details about, you know, definitions of them, which aren't, it's not really the point of this opportunity. The point here is to say that I would sit down with clients and I would go through traditional QEEG maps and show them things and say, you know, here's what delta means and here's what alpha means and so on, and you have too much here and too little there, and here's what you're likely to experience and contribute to your performance. And they're like, yes, absolutely, I understand. That's me. And they walk out of the room, and their coach, trainer, significant other, somebody on the other side of the door would say, hey, what'd you learn? And I say, yeah, it's me. He got it. It's exactly what I'm experiencing. They'd be like what? And you're like, I don't know. Something up here doesn't do something, you know, while pointing to their forehead. And so that didn't really have any tangible, you know, it didn't equate. They would lose it very quickly. And so we created some language and talked to people in terms that mean something to them. And so we just kind of standardized these definitions within our organization, and we can talk about that on another occasion. But basically the idea is around those 3 components that I told you about in the beginning, that there were these threads that emerged across all athletes. They really emerge around focus. And when focus includes both our attention, our sustained attention, and our impulse control, and around stress regulation and stress management. And by stress management, I mean things that would fall on the anxiety spectrum, but aren't necessarily a clinical origin. So how do we manage high pressure? Do we have the capacity for turning that off and kind of chilling ourselves out, self-soothing or calming, we might call it? Do we have the capacity for enduring it for a long time? And what is that variability? Are we just an emotional wreck, or do we come in pretty steady? So those are the two big ones, and then the third one is really around reaction speed and kind of motor involvement. So that breaks down and comes out of doing significant review of the literature, but also learning in vivo from athletes. And basically there's 7 different stages or 7 different states that I want to just introduce to you. The first is a baseline. This is if you were doing, this is what we do with all of our clients when they show up to do neurofeedback clinic or not, where we do an EEG evaluation, and we say, whether that's 1 electrode or any number up to some big number, when we're looking to say, what kind of characteristics or attributes do you bring to the equation? Are you over-aroused? Are you under-aroused? Where do you fit with regard to mood regulation and all those other types of things? So that's kind of what they show up with. Now, that's important and relevant and can be optimized, but then from there, specific to performance or outcomes with regard to performance, we cycle through these 7 steps. The second is to analyze. Well, this is, and I use a golfer here in these illustrations because I think it's an easy one to imagine, but this happens whether you're sending an email, having a phone conversation, board meeting, golfing, hockey, doesn't matter. This is the same for all of us, as best I can tell, that we move into an analysis where we say, all right, here's the club choice, here's what the lie looks like, here's what I've been taught to do. This is this thinking component, and there's a different electrical signature for that from your baseline. There should be a shift. Then after that's decided, we kind of get in the ready state, and that's where we say, all right, I'm good. Now I've thought about everything, I'm set up, and I'm just making sure there's a bit of a cognitive engagement. We're just checking in with ourselves. And then there's a pre-action, and the pre-action really is like washing out all of the thought process. We cannot decide what to do while doing what we're doing. We can be really fast, and that's what makes a lot of individuals in particular sports very effective, is they can make instantaneous decisions and then instantaneously act it out, but those are sequential processes. Parallel processing is very inefficient for what we're doing, because we'll start an action and then we have to change midstream. And so a golfer, again, one of the things Tiger Woods was particularly good at is he could be in a backswing and not feel it and just stop. Most people have to go ahead and follow through, and then they shank it, even though they go turn around off the tee box and they say, I knew I was going to do that. So thinking and doing at the same time is problematic. So we want to get into this nice, calm, clear, flush, clean, whatever the anchor word is, but we get rid of all that thought process. The action, we largely don't know what's going on. It's artifact riddled. It changes depending on the motor movement, what skills are involved, so I have no idea. I think something's probably interesting there, but until we have better analytics, and then that one might be off limits for a long time. And then last week we get into post-analysis, where looks the same, the signature looks the same as step 2, or analyzing, where we're evaluating what was the outcome of our decision and our action. But then very important is to then reset back to baseline. This is the moment in stage 6 where lots of our over-aroused or uptight athletes or performers, they kind of get hung up. They start modifying their game after having made a mistake or the outcome not happening. So I'll share a little nugget that's just been so valuable to me that I want to be sure and carry it over. I was working with Ricky Fowler we were doing a little study, and he was doing some practice putts, and I was counting to see how many he got in. There was 18, and there were 3, he got 15 balls in the hole. And I said, you missed 3. And he said, no, I didn't. I missed 2. 1 didn't go in. And I just kind of the expression on my face must have explained that I didn't quite understand. And he said, 2 of them I messed up. The 3rd one, I did exactly what I intended to do. The ball just didn't go in. The outcome didn't match my expectation, but I executed it perfectly as intended. So that's a really valuable nugget. I missed 2, but 1 of them didn't go in. So that ability to reset and kind of go back to this initial baseline is very valuable. Okay, so they have 3 primary goals. I want to pick up the pace just slightly so I can get to the end and have some opportunity for questions. There's 3 primary goals that people tend to show up with in the athletic world, which is to break through. So these are the individuals who are just trying to get to the next level. For whatever reason, they can't seem to move up. They can't get to the majors. They can't get into the D level. They're working from high school trying to get a scholarship. They just want to break through. There's other individuals who just are inconsistent. It's sometimes I'm great, sometimes I'm not. It's either their internal or external environment influences them, and they're trying to create some stability. And then lastly, they're the person who are trying to maintain excellence. They've already won 3 gold medals, and now they're going for their 4th. How can I optimize my opportunity for succeeding again? How can I stay at the top? Because no matter how good you are, there's somebody right behind you kind of chomping at your heels, and that creates quite a bit of pressure and stress for the individuals getting to the top. So when we think about this within a session or for a client, and they say, all right, that's why I'm coming, but what are our objectives? And there's 4 steps to this process, and these steps don't have specific timelines. It depends on the individual. The first is that they want to be able to create brain states. Certainly if we're looking at that baseline and you don't know what it means to have attention and you can't create focus, then that's a good place to start. We want to be able to create focus. We want to be able to create calm. We want to be able to create reaction speed. So creating these brain states is the first piece. The second piece is then creating the volitional control. We might do that in a session by having people do multiple types of protocols within a session, having them identify the different states and shift between the two, and having them identify when these different things might be valuable and practicing that in real life. So creating that volitional control. Once that's established, then we're going to create intensity. Yeah, you know how to calm yourself. Yeah, you know how to focus. Let's push it to the boundary. Let's see how intense you can be in those moments. And then lastly, once those things have been achieved, just to kind of maintain just like self-regulation abilities, to be able to sustain this across time, not let our environment influence us. We see this a lot when we have an individual who is their environment has shaped them or contributed to their experience of being in a particular way. I'll use anxiety as a state as an example. I'm in a stressful environment. I learn how to calm myself, but then I go back to that stressful environment without practicing the tools that I've learned. That causes a problem for us. So it's about maintaining, integrating that into real life, generalizing it. That very important component of learning theory that makes what we do effective. Learn it in the office, apply it in the field, and carry it through. Okay. So the last piece of these 3 broad topics that I told you at the beginning, there's the science, which is emerging, the technology, which we're working on, trying to create better experiences for people, and the third one was the culture. So the culture is something that we're trying to shift. Now, here's a practical application for me. I got the chance to work with Lululemon athlete ambassadors, and here we were doing a very simple assessment and got some traction. And this is, all the athletes are very proud to share. So they're tweeting, they're Facebooking, they're creating their brand and allowing this neuro ideas. So you can see that Hannah says she's hooked up to a brain analyzing machine. So it's kind of fun to see the language, and I encourage you just to let people go with whatever language they use, even if it's not always the best representation. As long as you're not using it as your own marketing materials, I mean, it's their language. Let them tell their story on Instagram, how they choose. But you can see it changes the idea. When that goes out, now young women who might have learning challenges or want to do things, work with mental skills in their sport, changes the attitude. They see a world-winning person doing these types of things, and that translates into kids. And ultimately, educational opportunities, better life choices being made, all of those types of things. That's ultimately where we're all headed with our work that we do, with whether they're clinical or performance. We know that their opportunities to perform in sport are just a miniature reflection of real life, and so preparing them to do that in a better way is the best strategy. So I'm going to leave you with a little inspiring video. I close all my talks with this one. Every time gives me the chills, and I've seen it hundreds of times. So if it's new for you, enjoy. If it's not, then bear with me, and then I'll have time for questions at the end. So here we go.
Is it just me or are we not getting soundtrack?
No, there's no sound.
Okay, Leslie, we don't have the sound.
Event time.
Better.
You have no sound?
Yep, good.
You have no sound? Good what?
We did a moment ago, but there was no sound in the
Oh,
beginning.
okay, fine. Okay, so I'll knock it back on then.
All right.
I was actually doing a world record distance jump for the Red Bull New Year No Limits, which was going to be a big show. It was a big event, and we were practicing prior to the event, and we were able to get to full distance. I had jumped 361 feet earlier that day, and we decided to do one last jump at night to simulate, a night jump, just like it's going to be come event time. Unfortunately, I had a malfunction with my snowmobile. It cut out in the air, and I ended up having a very, very big crash. I was knocked out, had a really severe concussion, and after that, I was a little bit slower. My focus was a little bit off. I was in the hospital for a week, and it was 3 days before I could remember anything. The original reason why I started doing the brain training was Red Bull, one of my sponsors. They kind of brought it up to me. They said, hey, this could help you out in snowcross racing. You're sitting on the line, and you'll wait and wait and wait, and then it's like, okay, now it's go time. And you have to be able to flip that light switch. You have to be able to flip it on and say, I need full focus right now. And even more so when you're doing, world record distance jump. It's like, okay, we're going to do this jump. When I say go, millions of people are going to be watching this. You need to be spot on. And I mean, that's when you need to have full focus. And that's what I noticed more than anything is after doing the brain training, I was able to have it more like a switch where it's like, hey, it's game time. Let's do this now. And my focus would be there, and I'd be ready to go.
I'm as excited as I think a person could be. I just safely landed over 400-foot jump. And, from start to finish, we took off. And the biggest thing is just keep that baby straight. Keep her on that dotted line.
Going from the state I was in to where I was after doing the brain training, I'm a 100% believer in it. I'm going to be at X Games doing freestyle, and I've actually got a couple different one-off events that we're working on, and I think they're going to be really cool. I can't say too much about them now, but definitely got some big plans for the future.
There's nothing left to say. Just have the guts to disagree. Clap their own feet for me. Where's your passion? Where's your fire today? Whoa, can't believe there's nothing you're willing to hate. I want to believe. Set my body on fire so I can be free. So I can be free. So I can be free.
All right, so that's kind of the. I'm not paid by Red Bull. That wasn't an endorsement or a sponsorship. Just happened to work with a lot of their athletes. So that was, yeah, that's it. So we've got some time for questions. I think you end at the top of the hour. So
okay.
All right.
Well, maybe you could lead it off, Rob, and I'll unmuting everybody.
Okay. Yeah, we had everybody muted to make sure it was quiet during your presentation. Well, first off, thank you. Leslie, that was wonderful, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. One of the questions I think people will wind up asking is, so how does this differ from just hooking up an athlete after doing a brain map? I mean, you're just not applying a protocol. You're really looking at specifics, and if I understand correctly, there's things you would want to do to not train a part of an athlete's brain that may seem to be a bit out of that normal range, but that may be what makes them a peak performer.
yeah, so there's like 13 questions built into that, and the answer is yes. The difference is that you are looking at the QEEG much like you would in a clinical scenario, and you're trying to understand how does that contribute to their experience. But then you also, as part of the evaluation, would have them do some cognitive challenge tasks. We have them do a standardized CPT. We might also have them do, everybody does that while having the EEG recorded. And then we also might have them do something that's more sport related. So we might have them in vivo taking some free throws or visualizing the target or whatever is applicable, and then looking to see how that shifts. And then where it differs is that in the interpretation piece, once you understand that and you're designing a protocol, it's what is the particular weakness of the individual in real life scenarios. So is it around attention and focus? Is it about being able to calm? Like, what is that piece that they're looking to address, rather than just like, you have a lot of some particular frequency, then you might not just be trying to downtrain that.
Yeah.
Was not muted there. So I'll just remind everybody that you're not muted in case you're not wanting to share your conversation.
Okay, Leslie, you
did that?
Yeah, that was good.
Oh, go ahead.
I was saying you were instrumental in developing the Versus, which is one of the most sophisticated neurofeedback platforms for peak performance, and it was a brilliant design and really well implemented. It involved all of the best. It demonstrated a real clear understanding of the technology and its applications. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and how it's being used now?
Yeah, so the idea was, at the time I had an office in LA and in Phoenix, and it was a pain because the athletes were traveling. In LA, it takes you an hour to go anywhere, even if it's a mile or two down the road. So it just became problematic. And also for most of our clients, we all experience this. There are plenty of people that we want to help, but they can't financially pull it off to be in our office, and we can do our best to help facilitate that. But anyway, the point is that we wanted to have a more cost-effective, but also an opportunity to put all of the ideas of what we do in a session in an app. And so it's limited in sensor placement, and due to the ability for us to be certain that the person can get the electrode in the right place on their own while traveling, and then it delivers an assessment and the feedback within a mobile device or an iOS device. That's currently being implemented, continues to be implemented at some professional and Olympic level places, and moving into some corporate wellness types of applications. There was a period of time where we made some refinements, wanted to address things that for this particular market, for like you guys as an example, there was a lot of feedback of how the product could be enhanced, and it's certainly still not perfect, but is growing into things like tracking metrics. Providers of service want more than what the app does itself, and so we've created a dashboard, created an opportunity for people to track multiple clients and all of those types of things, as well as some FDA hurdles. So all of those things are now in place, and in fact it's being re-released, so to speak, next in July. So that's hopefully going to be an opportunity for us to put it more into our practice, no matter what that practice looks like.
Okay, so you have been using that with professional athletes, the Versus in training situations, and that would be an option for other people who wanted to work with athletes is to utilize that as one of the platforms. What do you see as one of the best advantages of it from neurofeedback? Does it fulfill the training those dimensions, some of those dimensions that you discussed earlier? In your presentation?
Yeah, in fact, it's based on those. So again, it's really good for things like, I'll use this term in a non-clinical way. You as a licensed provider can decide if this is applicable to you, but anxiety spectrum types of things, including stress management and even into sleep regulation, recovery, those types of things, and in focus or attention. So those are the domains that it's being implemented and addressed and kind of aimed at. Again, there's some limitations just because of sensor placement, but outside of that, it's pretty flexible in working with most people.
Okay.
It's really strict on the application piece of it's really strict on the learning theory. That's one of the kind of the things that creep into my crawl from a neurofeedback world is the reason why neurofeedback works is it's based on learning theory. And so if we start abandoning those rules of operant conditioning and then some elements of classical conditioning, which is us, we're the ones who help them identify the state and generalize it to something else. But if we violate those operant conditioning principles, then we're going to lose some efficacy, if not completely. And so we're really strict on that component.
If people here want to understand how to implement that technology better, do you offer workshops through your organization or through the Versus company or anything like that so that they could access that?
Yeah, sure. Most of the time it's just hit me up. You've got my email there on the screen. You can, and I can point you to the resources. It depends if you want to do it in a conversation or if you want to go to a training or if you want to watch YouTube videos. There's a lot of information out there. And so it's, whatever venue or format you want, you can, there's a website around that product called getversus.com. So GETVERSUS.com. And so you can find that information there or contact me offline.
Okay, great. Other questions?
Do you have, maybe you have to bring him back. I'll have to bring you back to go over perhaps some of those, I guess specifically looking at the EEG and some of those in the, let's say, then those 7 steps that you talked about, and maybe how you're looking at that. I don't know if you'd be willing to come back and share maybe some, just raw EEG examples of what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I can tell you in 30 seconds or less some basic attributes about them. So the baseline is like what our typical evaluation is. So that just is how they show up. But then if we're looking at the EEG data and we ask them to engage or move into that analyze or problem solving, then we should see, generally speaking, both frontal suppression of slow activity and increases of faster frequency. But also there may be some structure, individual types of things. So depending on what process you're using, whether it's topographies or tomography or whatever, you're going to see general increases in activation. And then as we move from the analyze into step 3, we start to see that faster frequency calm down. And so it's something that we typically would think of more around that calm alert. So it might be in the lower beta range, high alpha increase over the baseline, where again, we continue to see a suppression of slow activity. And then in the pre-action state, this is the closest thing that in performance around what I'll call this, pure alpha meditative kind of, it's where you have alertness but absence of thought. And so that's that, awareness, that, awareness of everything but individually nothing kind of a place. So we see increases of calm there. So you might start to see alpha increasing with a suppression of fast activity, again, a generalized suppression of slow activity over the baseline. Action, as I mentioned, we have no idea what's going on. That usually looks like EMG. And then in the post-analyze, looks like the number 2 or analyze. So we see generally increases of fast activity, even up into gamma over the baseline with a suppression of slow if we're being very effective about it because we're critically evaluating. And that's predominantly in frontal and parietal areas, but may also have some specific lesser degree implications depending on the particular structure. And then we should go back to the baseline or look like it did when we showed up. And that's a great place to start for people, honestly, is understanding how to return to baseline after cycling through that, either with a win or a loss in that particular moment. That ability between 6 and 7 I generally call error resetting. It's when you screw it up, the capacity to go, yeah, crap, I screwed up. Do I need to make an adjustment or not? And if the answer is no, remembering Ricky Fowler's, nugget, just move on and let it go. It just didn't come out like you wanted. No big deal. Let's keep going.
Mm-hmm. And so you're having them actually, but if they can't actually do that action, you're having them go through it in their mind, like the action, the actual, action, pre-action, and all that. Are you having them visualize that? Is that what you would do to bring the equipment onto the field?
Yeah, there's 3 ways you can do it. In fact, so for an evaluation perspective, we have them do something standardized. So that's why a continuous performance test works really nicely, because it's standardized, it's easy to administer. Everybody typically has access to one of them. And so you can look at these things there, but then you can have visualization, or even if you have a video of the person doing their sport. So there was a famous female tennis player who we got to work with, who was a little bit of a hothead and would find mistakes, and we would just play. There was a bit of a cognitive component of desensitization-like work also happening. So we have that happen. We'd see the physiology start to ramp up because she saw this error, this big mistake, and then work through that, teaching the brain and the body to respond differently to that error that she had seen on film. So then there was a visualization and a film kind of a component. And then lastly is in vivo. That's the ideal scenario if you can go to a batting cage, or you're at the soccer field or on the basketball court. That's the ideal scenario. But not every sport, one, is conducive to that, like race car driving, for example. You just can't be there and make a turn incorrectly. It can be dangerous, and it's also time-consuming, not cost-effective, those types of things. So just kind of depends. You have to work within those boundaries the best you can.
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour, aren't we, Rob?
We are. Hey, Leslie, thank you so much. Great presentation. If you're willing to share all or part of this PDF, you can send it to me in a PDF format, and we'll distribute it to those that attended today. And thank you so much again. I'll be in touch with you next week.
Sounds great. Talk to everybody soon. Thanks so much again for the opportunity.
Yep,
You're
thanks,
welcome.
Leslie.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.